Tell us a little about how you became involved with the PBS show Reading Rainbow.
Well, I had done a couple of seasons of a PBS children's series that was produced out of WGBH in Boston called Rebop. And I had always been a fan of PBS and really admired their approach to the public airwaves, you know, and their mission in terms of educating, but again, bringing something more to the table, certainly in terms of education and enlightenment. And I've always been a big PBS fan. And I was on my way to Africa and was in New York City doing Live at 5 with Sue Simmons. And they were looking for a host of Reading Rainbow and just saw me on an interview and contacted me, tracked me down at the Carlisle Hotel. And that's when I was first introduced to the idea. And again, I know I keep saying this, but everything happens for a reason. In my mother's house, you either read a book or got hit in the head with one, you know? I mean, I grew up in a family where my mother just didn't read to us. I have two sisters. She just didn't read to us when we were kids. She read in front of us. And to this day, my mother always has at least one or two huge, thick novels that she's reading for her own enjoyment. And so reading, I grew up knowing that this was what we did, you know? You read. We took two newspapers, you know? This was in an era when, you know, Sacramento, California had two daily newspapers, right? One in the morning and one in the evening. So I'm acutely aware of how literature has shaped my life. And you combine that with the Roots experience where I just, from a firsthand experience, saw just how powerful this medium is. The idea of using television to steer children back in the direction of literature and the written word just made so much sense to me. And they asked me if I was interested, and I was like, absolutely, you know, let's do it. And not even having any idea, you know, what it would become, but it just seemed like it was a no-brainer of an idea. Our children in this country spend an inordinate amount of time sitting in front of the television, and a child, when they're just making that decision, when they are at that part of their journey when they're deciding, will I be a reader for life or not, to meet them at what I call the point of purchase and give them an experience that can help tip the scales, just made so much sense to me.
So how exactly was the show structured, and what was its overall concept in terms of what you were going to deliver each week?
Well, the idea was to do a magazine formatted show that highlighted the joys of reading, the idea that you could pick up a book and travel anywhere in the universe, really, by using your imagination. And our job, we always said that our job on Reading Rainbow was to portray reading, the idea that reading is a fun activity, that it's enjoyable. And I think for a lot of kids, they grow up, and why they don't become readers is because they are communicated, they get the idea, they get the signal that reading is being forced on them. But I believe if you can meet a kid where they are, you know, parents ask me all the time, well, how do I get my kid to read? And I said, well, what is your kid interested in? If your kid wants to read comic books, for God's sakes, buy your kid comic books, because it doesn't matter really what it is as long as they are drawn to do it. And once they get that thirst, once that spark is lit, then they'll find their own, you know, way through. So the idea was just to light that fire, you know, light the fire.
So how did you choose books and topics that would actually be used on the show in order to inspire these people?
The books that we used on Reading Rainbow had a series of criteria that they had to meet. It had to be literature that was available. Once you put a book on TV, it's not fair to not have the audience member able to go and find that piece of literature. And I tell you, at the very beginning, it was so difficult to get the publishers to cooperate with us, and it was so gratifying over time to have them then, beat down our doors to get their books on Reading Rainbow. The other important piece of decision making that we always employed was, how do we continue to portray women and people of color in non-traditional ways and roles? And so the literature also was put through that, was looked at through that lens. Over time, we got money from different sources like the National Science Foundation, which caused us to identify a certain number of shows every season that would be science-based or math-based. And then just the need to have a variety of experience represented. Reading Rainbow we always saw the book as a jumping-off point from which we could then go and experience the world. And I think that was the magic of Reading Rainbow, that we really did portray books as a portal to life experience.
Now, was that part of your responsibility as executive producer to reach out to the different publishing entities, or and in the beginning, I know it was hard.
It was really, really difficult. Most of the heavy toting, as they say, was done by the rest of the producing staff. My job really was just to be the face of Reading Rainbow, to be the heart of Reading Rainbow. On camera, it was to access that part of me that was a third grader, and off camera, it was to really be as best as I was able an ambassador for literature and the written word.
Now, I don't recall, perhaps you can clarify, the Reading is Fundamental government program was certainly around at the inception of Reading Rainbow.
Reading is Fundamental predated Reading Rainbow by many, many years. But we were certainly, through the agency of PBS, became a part of the government's interest in advancing and promoting the cause of literacy.
And you dealt with 21 years of books. What is...
5. We did Reading Rainbow for 25 years.
25
years. Did the show for 25 years.
What kind of a challenge is it to keep a show like that fresh and keep mining new material or similar material in different ways?
It was an interesting thing because we literally, over the 25 years we did this show, we watched the field of children's literature virtually explode. And the baby boom generation, as we got older and started having children and started focusing all of this disposable income as well as our attention on our kids, it was part of that explosion. They say that this generation is the most indulged generation in the history of civilization, which is because this huge population of baby boomers, when they started having kids and we had reached a level of wealth and disposable income in the society, we focused it all on our kids, on our children. And so we were just at the right place at the right time. There was just this nexus of opportunity, and as things happened, there was just a real explosion of a variety of new literature created specifically for children that sustained us for all of those years.
So over the course of that 25 years, did you have favorite stories?
Oh, yeah. I think my favorite Reading Rainbow episode of all is Amazing Grace, because I love what the story says. It's about a young black girl who wants to try out for Peter Pan in her school play, and she's told by her schoolmates that first she can't be Peter Pan because she's a girl, number one, and she's black, number two. It's the same story that I was told by Alex Siegel when I got to USC. You can only try out for the butlers in our plays. And Grace goes home and she shares this with her mother and her grandmother, and they tell her, like my mother told me, that you can do anything you want. My mother told me there are no limits on you, save the ones that you impose upon yourself. Now, she did everything she could to make sure I could play on the playing field, that I had, commensurate abilities and skills, but it had to come from me. And that's what Grace's mother and grandmother tell her. You can be anything you want if you put your mind to it. That message, coupled with Whoopi Goldberg being in the show, talking about how people have always perceived her as being different and how important it was for her to find her own unique voice and be that, is exactly what we wanted to do on Reading Rainbow. Not unlike Fred Rogers, who felt it was so important to tell kids, your feelings are real, they matter. We wanted our audience on Reading Rainbow to understand that they were growing up in a very complex world, and we wanted to give them the sense that they were not in it alone, and that in addition to that, the world is really a wonderful place, and you will find your place in it. And that episode, Amazing Grace, says all of those things for me.
And the world does have a place, but you also showed out-of-the-world places. You were able to bring Next Generation in. How did that happen?
Well, again, everything happens for a reason. Rick Berman, the executive producer of Star Trek The Next Generation, came from children's television. He produced a children's show called The Big Blue Marble. So my relationship with Reading Rainbow certainly predated my having joined the cast of Star Trek The Next Generation. And coming from his background, Rick understood the value and importance of Reading Rainbow. And whenever I needed to go off and do a shooting block, he made it happen. He arranged it so that I could continually do both simultaneously. When the opportunity came up through the book The Bionic Bunny Show, every episode of Reading Rainbow is based on a children's book selection. He was all for it, and it was unprecedented. We were the first. The Reading Rainbow crew was the first outside production crew to come and shoot on the Next Generation sets. Paramount had said no to everybody who had wanted to come, and Rick was our champion. With the studio, and it's one of the fan favorites of the Reading Rainbow episodes, the Bionic Bunny Show, where we go behind the scenes of Star Trek.
And how did you get permission to use the bloopers? I mean, outtakes, things that nobody else would ever have seen.
Again, that was Rick Berman. His love of children's television and his understanding of its importance sort of opened the doors to that which had always been locked.
Was it your mom that led you to feel this need to push literacy?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Reading Rainbow is really the intersection of what I know to be two of the most powerful influences in my life: the power of the written word and the power of the moving image. And in Reading Rainbow, I had an opportunity to combine them in the service of an audience, a children's audience. It doesn't get much better than that, Having the opportunity to impact a human being at that decision-making point. People come up to me every day of my life and tell me that Reading Rainbow is a treasured part of their childhood, that they're a teacher today because of Reading Rainbow, that they're a writer today because of Reading Rainbow. I have people coming up to me every day and telling me that English is a second language for them, and watching Reading Rainbow helped them develop fluency in the English language.
In a quarter century of shows, you had to see an evolution of the kind of material you were able to present and what was actually out there. How do you think that evolution went, and where do you see it going?
Well, It was certainly a conscious effort on our part to, after we had been on the air for a while, and we felt that we had really established a solid relationship with our audience, and we felt that we had really gotten the process of storytelling down in terms of how we presented the books and how the shows enhanced the experience of reading literature and the written word. It became important to us to take that next little step and really deal with what it meant to be a child growing up at the end of the 20th century. And we began to do shows that had a more weighty aspect to them in terms of taking on and doing books that were about divorce and adoption and having a parent incarcerated behind bars. We did a show on slavery. We did a show about 9/11. It became, we felt a responsibility that we were engaged in a conversation with our audience, and that because that LeVar that appeals to a third grader, or that part of LeVar that experiences life as sort of a third grader, or that LeVar was really the big brother, the host, the big brother, that's sort of the Pied Piper, and we felt that we had such a connection to the audience that it was incumbent upon us to let them know that, again, they were not alone, and that that what they were going through, what they were thinking, what they were feeling, there was somebody out there who was validating it for them, especially if they weren't necessarily feeling or experiencing that validation in their own lives at home. And I think that those risks that we took, we got some pushback from PBS initially, and I'm really proud of the fact that those are some of the most powerful episodes of the show, because we did take the risk with our audience, and there was some concern that they did not want that kind of content from us, but in the end we discovered that that's exactly the kind of content they wanted. That's exactly the kind of relationship that they wanted to explore. And we were absolutely conscious of needing to create a balance too. You can have the serious as long as you balance it with the silly as well in children's TV.
And in Next Generation.
Yeah.
And
in
even
life,
in Roots.
in life. One of my favorite scenes in Roots is when Kunta is sold at auction, and he's taken out of that pen and put up on the auction block. And at the end of the auction, when he is being handed over to the man who's purchased him, he grabs a hold of the chain and he runs around that square. And at one point you recognize that he's playing with them. They can't catch him. He's too quick, he's too nimble, yet he realizes there's no place for him to go. And at the end, he hands the chain to the black man. He hands it to Fiddler. And I love that scene because it's one of the few light moments that we get in the first few hours of Roots, but it also speaks to the awareness that Kunta had. Even though he had no language in common, he was aware enough of the situation to find some humanity in it. And there was another moment in that sequence where during the actual auction itself, the camera pans several faces and it lands on the face of a Native American man who's just standing there, and then it moves on. And it's just like, boom, it's like, wow, wow.
You provided so many with a validation through this show, through Reading Rainbow, and a self-awareness. Clearly, the community you were working in recognized what an achievement that was. 4 Daytime Emmys, 4 NAACP Image Awards, and people still talk about it. I mean, 25 years is nearly 3 generations of people now.
Right. There are people now who are the first generation of Reading Rainbow, children who are human adults now who are in their late 20s, who started watching Reading Rainbow when they were kids, who are now beginning to have their own children and sharing the show with them. It's pretty wild. Reading Rainbow, in terms of the awards, we won, I think, everything there was out there. Prix Jeunesse Awards, Peabody's. I don't know how many Emmys the show itself won for Outstanding Children's Series. I have, a dozen? No, how many? 13? 13. Baker's dozen. But it's the people who come up every day and say, thank you, that's, and, having my mother say, you know what, that made a difference.
We're going to cut with Mom for a moment. Pizza's here. Quite a bit, actually. And how did you get into doing that, and particularly for animated series?
Voiceover work for an actor is like heaven, because it's all acting and none of the hair and makeup and early calls. You can do voiceover work, and these days they love to bring the EPK crew in. It used to be that you could do voiceover work and not worry about what you look like at all, which is great, because it's all about I grew up listening to the radio and radio drama and voiceover work. I love books on tape, because it's about, everybody wants to be read to. And I think the appeal for actors in terms of doing voiceover work is it just breaks the craft down to its basic and most elemental form. It's just you and a microphone, pretending. It's great.
Any thoughts on Kwame, the narrator from Captain Planet?
Let our powers combine. Earth. Look, I love cartoons, and Captain Planet was way ahead of its time. Now we are really focusing on being much more environmentally conscious. But, Ted Turner and TBS, Ted was way ahead of the curve. Let's create a children's cartoon that speaks to environmental responsibility on a personal level. God bless him.
Growing up, obviously, you were with the ecology movement, we used to call it back then.
We did call it the ecology movement, right.
And now, of course, we call it going green.
Yeah.
You think Captain Planet might have more relevance today? Like, immediately, right now?
Absolutely, right now. Captain Planet was about taking personal responsibility for the state of the environment. And if we're ever going to create a different relationship with the earth than the one we have now, it has to involve personal responsibility.
With such a wide-ranging career and so many skill sets in a very short period of your life, you're not even halfway yet. Particularly directing, I do want to ask you, you've directed the other Star Trek series. Did you sense the same kind of family within those casts as you felt with Next Generation?
Honestly?
Yeah.
No. In the modern context, I know that the Next Gen cast was the platinum standard. And I know that it became part of the ethos that you should attempt to have a good relationship. Didn't always work out that way. It's not the kind of thing that you can orchestrate. It's either there or it's not. And don't get me wrong. I had an opportunity to observe all of the other casts, really up close as you can be without being a part of that circle. But my experience was that what we had at Next Gen was, it was just magic. It was just something that happened. You can't create it.
And directing all those other shows, particularly sci-fi, you then moved into a whole different realm of, particularly the Tiger Woods story. How did you become involved with that project, and where did Tiger stand with regard to production and his involvement?
The Tiger Woods story came about because I had developed a reputation on the Paramount lot for being a really a good storyteller with the camera and really efficient with my time. Tom Russo, who was the head of the Movies of the Week division at Paramount, called me one day. Actually, when I was in Las Vegas, I was doing press for the Star Trek Experience at the Las Vegas Hilton. When I got the call, there was a script coming to my house for a TV movie based on a book that was about Tiger Woods and his father, his mother and father, Earl and Clotilda. And if I wanted it, it was mine. And I flew home that night and read it and called Tom that evening. Said, I'm in. I'm so in. I loved the fact that it was this black man and this Asian woman that both forged, this iconic figure that we've come to know as Tiger Woods. That he was equal parts his mother and his father, and that they came together so beautifully and dynamically in him that it was just. I thought it was a cool family story.
And Tiger the man, working with?
Didn't work with Tiger. Met Tiger after we finished shooting. I met him at the Beverly Hills Hotel. He came to do an event for Magic Johnson, whom I know. And I wanted to meet Tiger. I knew that Tiger and Earl were aware of the Showtime movie, but they had a falling out with the man who wrote the book upon which our screenplay was based. So I knew that they didn't have any direct involvement. And when I met Tiger, it was interesting. His response was to look to his dad because he wasn't quite sure how to respond to me. And I had the opportunity to tell Earl Woods, you have nothing to fear from me. This movie is a love poem to you and your family. And I hope one day, he was not in favor of it having been done, but I encouraged him at some point, I really hope that you have an opportunity to sit down and watch it, because it really is. It's a love poem.
Now, discussing working with people who are alive or stories that are current, you seem to have worked with a number of, pardon me, movies of the week in particular, dealing with people living and stories current.
Right.
I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the responsibilities you might feel. Ron LaFleur. Yeah. The Guyana tragedy.
The story of Jim Jones.
So current.
Yeah.
What kind of work does that take to keep it real, honest, and still art?
I think you have to straddle a fine line between knowing that you're making a movie and remaining true in some way to the person that you're portraying. In the case of Ron LaFleur, I didn't meet Ronnie until I had been playing him for almost 2 weeks. But again, as an actor, my approach has always been find that thing that I have in common with the character, and go from there. And in Ronnie's case, in Ron LaFleur's case, we had very different backgrounds, but I could certainly relate to some of the struggles that he had gone through. And those things, for an actor, that's the juicy part, Those are the juicy bits. And you rely on the text to help inform, those factual aspects that you don't want to live without. But it does feel like a responsibility. If somebody is still alive, there is a responsibility that you feel to get it right, and to get the essence of it. I don't think any actor wants to do an imitation. They want to communicate the energy, the essence, the integrity of a person.
And is there something that you find maybe draws you to these almost biopics? Even Jesse Owens, story.
Yeah. I just think it was a function of the times. Television used to do a lot of biopics. We used to engage in a lot of storytelling of that nature. We just don't so much anymore. I just came up as an actor during a time when that was, part of the fare that was being done. Miniseries, movies of the week, they hardly exist today. But that's what was being done, during the early part of my career.
So, given your druthers, if someone said you could do a biopic of any character you want, who would that be?
Well, are they casting for the Sidney Poitier story?
It hasn't been done.
Man had such a profound impact on my life, my career. That's one I'd like to do. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I'll stick with Sidney. You can't go wrong there.
No, you can't. Talk to me a little bit about the Best of Fest award from the Chicago Children's Film Festival for Blizzard.
Yeah.
How did that film come to you, or did you go to it?
No, that film was brought to me by my friend now. I didn't know him at the time, Robert Schwartz, one of the best producers I've ever known and had the pleasure of working with. Robert was making this picture, and he knew of my work as a director. He was a Star Trek fan, and he had this Christmas story that had a fair amount of complexity in it, in that there were 3 different worlds that needed to be represented: a modern world. Part of the story takes place in the fantasy world of Santa's Village, and part of the story takes place in a period world of the 1940s. And he just felt that, given who I was and my background, and that it was a good fit. And I love that movie. I'm so proud of Blizzard. And I do believe, even though we never got domestic distribution, it was one of those, one of those Hollywood stories. We just never got a domestic distribution deal. But it's available on DVD, and you can get it at Blockbuster. And I honestly believe that over time, Blizzard will find its way into that canon of classic Christmas movies. We actually started out, what we wanted to do was make a Christmas movie in the tradition of classic Christmas movies. And I think at the end of the day, we did exactly that. It feels like a timeless holiday movie.
Holiday movie now part of your past, along with sci-fi and biopics and so much more. What are you currently looking at?
I spend most of my time behind the camera, directing movies, television, episodic. Directed a feature film very recently, a small independent feature. Used 4K technology, directed Reach For Me with the Dalsa Origin 4K camera. It's the first, and as it turns out, the only feature film that will ever be made with the Dalsa, because that division just closed. Storytelling is my passion. It's what I do. I'm now, after having closed myself off to acting so that I could really establish my career as a director, and at the insistence, if not gentle encouragement, of my wife, I'm really open to acting again. I miss it, especially when I'm on the set directing really, really good actors. But this is a business about perception, and I really felt that if I was ever to be taken seriously as a filmmaker, then I had to create some separation. And so for over 10 years, I didn't take acting gigs. And now I'm really open to all of that again. For 30 years, it's been a matter of staying one step ahead of somebody wanting to define me. And I've never wanted to be able to be put in a box. I don't think that you can enjoy the kind of staying power that I've had over these 30 years unless you continually reinvent yourself and challenge people's notion of who they think you are. And I love that. I love actually knowing what I can do and then having the opportunity to show somebody and just surprise them. Well, I didn't know he could do that. And he does that too? And he can do that? Well, wow. What else can he do? Becomes the question. But it's always a process of education. This is a business that's based on perception. So I enjoy the process of expanding people's idea, people's perceptions of who LeVar Burton is and what he's capable of.
Well, and clearly you've explored for yourself who LeVar Burton is and what you're capable of. I'm wondering, given your early experiences with Roots, and then of course Next Generation, and all of the directing work, and we've discussed how everything is informing each other and each piece is a part of another. Have you ever explored your own genealogy to see how far back you, LeVar, goes?
Oh yeah. I think most black people in this country have, and the sad truth of it is you can only go back so far, except for now with the Human Genome Project, which is made so possible through the mapping of genetic material throughout generations. I've been able to determine where on the planet I share DNA in common with folks. And that's really exciting. That 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago wasn't possible. So I now know that at least on a biological level, I share DNA with people from certain parts of Africa and certain parts of the Middle East and certain parts of Europe and certain parts of America. I have roots in all of these places. That's a part of my genetic imprint, and it makes complete and total sense to me. I mean, I've always felt like, that phrase, I'm a child of the universe, I've always felt like, I belong here. No matter what here means to you, I feel like I belong here.
Sounds like a lesson taught by Gene Roddenberry.
And Fred Rogers.
And Fred Rogers.
And Alex Haley.
Most certainly.
Yeah.
Now, maybe 5 years from now, 10 years from now, an aspiring entertainment professional of 16, 17 years old sees this interview. What advice do you give them? What do you tell someone who's never met you but is somehow now connected to you? What do you want to tell a future generation?
Seriously.
Seriously.
May I? Find something else to do. I mean that. Because it's not for the weak of heart or the weak of spirit. Had I known then what I know now, would I still have embarked on this journey? You bet. I absolutely would have. But my feeling is if I can convince you to go and do something else, then this really wasn't for you in the first place. It's way too hard. There's way too much rejection for those who aren't really committed to it. These days, kids get into this business and they want to be television stars. They don't want to be actors. They want to be a celebrity. They don't have a real connection to that craft, to, the first actors on this planet came from the spiritual tradition. Acting has evolved from that part of us that took care of the spiritual needs of the community. And it's a noble and ancient profession, in my view. And you really, if you want to do it right, you want to do it for the right reasons, which is you have an absolute burning desire to connect with people. And that's different than just wanting to be famous.
How has fame affected you?
Well, I'm 52 now. I did Roots when I was 19. So the truth about my life is I've been famous longer than I've not been famous in my life. And it's like a second skin. I've grown comfortable with who I am and how my life is. And I'm good with that. And I think I have earned my level of comfort with who I am because it's been through process. It hasn't been a straight line. It's been up and down and highs and lows and hills and valleys. And I think I have hard fought and hard won my level of peace and contentment with who I am and what I leave behind. And the best part about my life is I feel like I'm just getting started. I can't wait to see what happens next? I look in the mirror and I still see that 19-year-old kid who's decided, you know what, I can make an impact on the world and I don't have to wear a collar. Let me go see what's out there. When I look in the mirror, that's the person I see.
So one final question. Hypothetically speaking,
Yeah.
you get a phone call 30 years from now from the Archive of American Television,
Yeah.
and they want to do a follow-up interview. What would you like to be able to say is new
Wow.
for you?
I would hope that whatever it is, it's as interesting as these past 30 years have been for me, and that they are full of at least a modicum of value that I think that those projects that I will eventually become associated with as a body of work, I would like to think that that which I contribute over the course of the next 30 years are half as good as that which I've been able to be a part of up until now.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, absolutely.
This has been amazing.
Yeah, for me too.
I've learned a lot.
Yeah, for me too. Thank you.